Hello! I'm Edwina Crouch-Pears, and you're in the studio with me again with another liberal arts major. His name is Michael Ripley. He's going to talk to us about his liberal arts major. Welcome, Michael.
Hello.
So tell us, what did you major in college?
I majored in modern European history, which covered the period of the Napoleonic era up through the Cold War, generally.
Sounds like an interesting period.
A lot happened.
And why did you choose your major?
Because I've always been interested in history, and as a youngster I was a World War II enthusiast. Granted, that kind of fell off after my time in the Army, but I find the period in history to be quite pivotal in the human, at least modern human history.
What are you doing with your major in your life now, and in what ways has it helped you?
Well, I'd have to say that in general, it gives you more of a perspective on things. You don't necessarily assume that just because someone says they're an expert and know about something that happened that they actually do. Politicians routinely throw around historical facts that are nothing more than blather that they're using to try to bolster their pitiful position.
When you were in school, did you have a vision of what you wanted to do with your major?
Not especially, no. I kind of drifted into it and just happened to become involved with the library, and so I ended up there as it seemed like a good match at the time. You know, the study of history and being in a place with lots of books on history.
Ah, yes.
I don't know if that actually has worked out in the long run, but it certainly didn't hurt having that on my resume, I'm sure.
The book trap. That's how they get us, isn't it?
It is. I believe so. It's all a conspiracy.
Let's see. Is there something that you'd still like to do with your major?
Well, recently I've often pondered what it would be like to teach history. I think that would be an interesting thing. In the past I would never have even considered it, but after all of the turmoil at the library in the last few years, I've sort of looked outward and thought, what could I do other than this if I had to? And of course it requires getting teaching credentials, which is a rather complicated process because it's based on what grades or where you want to teach, and you have to do it specifically, like kindergarten, middle school. You can't just get teaching credentials and go running off and teach. So that sort of stymied me in the short run, so I'm still just debating what I would like to teach, what grade levels if I was to do it.
Do you have any ideas on that? Kindergarten history?
Yes. Oh, and here's a picture of a mummy. No, though younger children I think would be interesting because they tend to be a little more open. You start getting into junior high and high school and they know everything and aren't really that interested generally, though I'm sure there will be some people that were. And then of course college would be ideal, just because generally people are there because they want to be.
Right.
But again, that's something I need to investigate further. Other than that, though, not really. Teaching's about the really, I think, main thing you can do with a, history degree at least. It's not really too applicable elsewhere in a lot of respects. I mean, you can try stretching it out and making it sound like it has some value to whatever job you're going into, but you really have to pad that.
Yes. Well, the benefits are a little less tangible, shall we say.
Yes, that's I think often the case in fields of intellectual study. Often they don't seem to necessarily have a tangible payoff. I mean, other than interest and perhaps teaching, because you found it interesting. Maybe someone else would too.
Right. It's a pyramid scheme.
It is.
Are you glad you have the background that you do, or do you wish you had chosen something else to major in?
I think I'm happy with the major I took. I mean, granted, there would probably be more lucrative majors I could have taken, but it's never been a huge priority to me. I mean, more languages I think would have been my other foreign, like Spanish, for example, or just because languages, I mean, have their own sort of tie-in to history often. There's certain gives you a sense of the outlook of a given group of people who speak a given language. The Germans, for example, have a certain very, at least during my time there, I had this sense of them being very orderly. Everything needs to be very precise. And I think it was reflected in German history to some extent, this idea of, a certain amount of order. Not necessarily a bad thing, but
Right.
on the other hand, it can be a terrible thing when you're trying to ramrod it down other people's throats. So,
Indeed. Did you find it reflected in the language as well? I know you studied that for a while.
to an extent, it's very. It's not quite as what's the word I'm looking for? Fast and loose as English. English tends to adopt words from all kinds of places, and there's a lot of contradictions in their rules. And if you learn it, if you're a native speaker, it's not that big a deal because you just kind of grow up with it. But if you're from another, speak another language and try to learn English, it can be very difficult because there's a lot of weird spelling things and grammatical oddities that keep flying in the face of the rules. So German was pretty straightforward. So yes, to answer your question, it did seem rather orderly.
Interesting. What do you think is the value of a liberal arts major, especially now in the 21st century?
I think it helps people think for themselves, which I think is sorely lacking in society these days. People are just very willing to just listen to whatever the local, flash in the pan demagogue wants to say and just buy it, hook, line, and sinker, without thinking one bit about it. That's not to say they can't agree with the demagogue, but they should really be well enough educated to know whether the person's actually, spouting things that have any validity or it's just a bunch of hot air. And I think college in general, that's really what it does, is make you think for yourself, or it should. I mean, that's the ideal thing, is when you get out, you can at least go, is that, that person just told me something, is that true, or is it just a bunch of hogwash? Or, not just sit there and nod your head and go, yeah, that sounds good. It's too much trouble to think about.
Right.
So that's my take on it. I just think it's just too easy, I think, and I mean, not just American society, just human society in general, too. It's much easier to live in a dictatorship than a democracy, and democracies require people to think for themselves. That's not to say they can't disagree, but if you're going to have any sort of intelligent discourse, you really have to know what you're talking about, or you're just spewing things back at each other and calling names and, hey, you're this, you're that, and I just find that very annoying.
Sort of like the current election campaign.
People calling each other Hitler, and I just sit there and go, what the heck are you talking about? Right-wingers calling left-wingers Hitler when Hitler was about as right-wing as you're ever going to get. Left-wingers calling right-wingers communists and social. It's like, where are you guys coming from? You look at a dictionary, at least read the definitions of these. Don't just start throwing words around because they sound nice and nasty. But that's what people do often. I'm just is so frustrating.
So do you have any other thoughts about liberal arts or history majors or anything of that sort?
I don't know. I mean, I think it's often just a personal choice. If someone's going to go to college, what they want to, pursue is often, are they an alpha personality or, not? And, I would say history isn't for everyone. People who tend to be very analytical and math-driven and science-driven aren't often interested in, quote, the social arts, like literature and history. Not to knock them, but it's the other way. And I never was good with math. I always found it too daunting. So I think it really is just sort of a personal choice as far as following it or not. But in any case, I'm glad I did it, and I think it just gives you a perspective on things that at least history does, because no matter how much people think they've changed, often I don't think they've really changed that much at all. Prettier toys, but they're still the same people swinging them around or jumping up and down and saying how great they are. I'm sure the Romans thought they were the pinnacle of civilization, and at the time they were, I suppose.
Right.
But, they're long gone. And I think every civilization sooner or later will pass on and something will take its place. So, I mean, I think that's what history shows, if people want to pay attention to it. But, that's the trick, isn't it? Getting people to pay attention.
Well said. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for coming in and being interviewed and joining us with your perspective.
Of course, my perspective, yes. Quite interesting, I'm sure.
I think our viewers will think so. Isn't that right? Thank you for watching.